Let me say this plainly. There is no heroism in what Mangione did. This was a senseless act of violence. It was a cold and calculated crime that stole a life and put New Yorkers at risk. We don't celebrate murders, and we don't lionize the killing of anyone. And any attempt to rationalize this is vile, reckless, and offensive to our deeply held principles of justice.
Just in the last hour, Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg announcing the indictment of Luigi Mangione for the murder of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson outside the Hilton Hotel in Midtown on December 4th, 2024. Mangione has been charged with 1 count of first-degree murder in furtherance of terrorism, 2 counts of murder in the second degree, one of which is charged as an act of terrorism, as well as a number of criminal charges related to weapons possession. Let's bring in MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin, also with us, former top prosecutor at the Department of Justice, and MSNBC legal analyst Andrew Weissman. All right, Lisa, walk us through these charges.
So, Alicia, as you just noted, the majority of the charges here actually stem from the possession of the gun and related paraphernalia. There are 7 different gun charges here, and they don't seem to be in the alternative to each other, meaning he could be independently convicted of each of these 7 gun charges. Where it comes to the murder charge, though, I think the first one is the most interesting and the one designed to really carry the most punch, and that's a murder in the first-degree charge. So in New York, unlike other jurisdictions, just premeditated murder is not first-degree murder in New York. It generally requires a plus factor. You try to murder a police officer, for example, or you murder the witness to a crime who you know is about to testify. Farther down on the list in the New York statute is that you commit a murder in furtherance of terrorism or an act of terrorism. And that's how Luigi Mangione was charged here. And I just wanted to focus in on what it means to commit a murder in furtherance of an act of terrorism, because the statute defines it and the indictment parallels the language. It says that you are essentially carrying out a murder, a premeditated murder, meaning you know that you're going to carry out this murder in advance, either to intimidate civilians, to influence policy of a unit of government through intimidation or coercion, or to affect the conduct of government by murder or another major crime. And here, what I found interesting about the press conference was that it seemed as if the New York City Police Commissioner, Jessica Tisch, in talking about the reaction to the crime, was attempting to bolster that terrorism charge, right? And explaining to people this was cold, this was calculated, this was designed to scare people. That is a way of sort of surrounding the charges here with a buffering or a cushion of language about that terrorism charge. Whether they can prove that Luigi Mangione intended to have that effect is a wholly separate question, and one that is really going to put prosecutors, I think, to their paces. That having been said, we don't know the plethora of evidence at their disposal. We don't know much of what he left behind electronically. We have seen maybe a snippet of some of his writings, and it will matter what he said about his intent to murder Brian Thompson and for what purpose if they are going to succeed on this first-degree murder charge.
Lisa's mind went exactly where mine did, which is how do you prove that the intent was in fact terrorism?
Yeah, so normally in what I would say is a traditional or true terrorism case, somebody is in Al-Qaeda or ISIS, and there's something like the Boston bombing that happens, which is not an Al-Qaeda, but it's there's an actual repeated bombing in a very public setting, killing and hurting scores of people. So there it sort of speaks to itself. I mean, you have that. Here, when you've got an isolated event where there doesn't appear, again, we don't know, as Lisa said, what all the evidence is. It doesn't appear that he was actively publicizing this and using it to engage in some sort of message to the government. It's going to be less clear. The one thing that is that although on paper it appears to be a bit of a reach from what we have seen, like the public evidence doesn't seem to support that. And again, as Lisa's right, we don't know. Privately, he was saying all sorts of things. The government doesn't have to prove that to get a conviction, because they will say they want a lesser included charge. So when you charge first degree, you will give the jury the option of saying, you know what, if we don't prove terrorism, you can find just plain old murder. And you know what, for a murder charge, if they get a conviction, and this seems like a very strong case for that, that you would still get a lot of time. My sort of my sort of mind is not so much to the terrorism piece, because I thought that seemed a little bit of a stretch from what we know. It's more, are we going to hear from the defense about mental health issues? And I don't mean that in any way in a disparagement, and I also don't mean it as an excuse, but as an explanation. What we've seen publicly is such an erratic sort of amalgam of smart things and sort of things that you wouldn't expect a smart criminal to do. Going to Starbucks beforehand, still having a lot of the evidence on you days after the arrest, seem inconsistent with somebody who also clearly knew where the victim was going to be, planned that, figured out how to escape. I mean, so there just seems like it might be some grounds for a mental health defense, or at least with respect to sentencing, raising that. So I think that's something to keep an eye out for.
Lisa, you get last word, but I am curious where this goes from here.
I think, certainly we should expect to see Luigi Mangione in New York sooner than later. Before you came to air, we now have reportable that Luigi Mangione is going to waive extradition from Pennsylvania. And so given that, and given who his lawyers are here, we understand that he's represented by Karen Friedman Agnifilo, who is the former, essentially #2 in the Manhattan DA's office, which is now prosecuting this crime. I would expect that we'll see Luigi Mangione make his first appearance here in New York, at least within the week, if not sooner.